Hi, my name is Laura Johnson, and I am presenting on Chapter 8 of the Body Remembers Casebook called No Techniques Required. In Chapter 8, No Techniques Required, the author begins with the following statement. Sometimes the best therapeutic technique is no technique at all. This may sound strange because so much of counseling is based on sound theories and techniques, but there may come a time with almost every client one works with during which it may be necessary and beneficial for the counselor to lay aside techniques. In fact, in some instances, techniques are not only not useful, but could even cause potential harm to one's client. So what does it look like to lay aside techniques with a client? It starts with simply being with the client, relating to them as one human to another human. During this time, the counselor makes contact with the client. This is something that I will discuss and explain later in the presentation. Finally, it involves following the client's lead. The counselor steps aside from leading and guiding the session and allows the client to take control. The client described in this chapter is an 18-year-old girl named Patty. Patty is a freshman in college with possible traumatic history, yet to be confirmed by the therapist. She is suffering from severe anxiety and panic attacks, but is afraid to take the medication her doctor suggested. Patty has never been in therapy before and is terrified of the experience. While most counselors would traditionally begin a first session by taking the client's history, the therapist working with Patty chose to go against, as she put it, common wisdom and my usual routine, and put off taking her history. Instead, the therapist spent her time in this initial session following Patty's lead, working to help her feel more comfortable, striving to let her feel in control, and making contact with her. When the therapist met Patty in the waiting room, she noticed that Patty was shaky, pale, and looking down at the ground. She did not make eye contact and was visibly uncomfortable and unsure of herself. When given the opportunity to choose a seat, she distanced herself from the therapist by sitting as far from her as she could. The therapist, noticing Patty's fears right away, did everything she could to make her more comfortable. She gave her freedom to sit wherever she desired in the room. She also made sure to observe her carefully before speaking. She did this because she wanted to use Patty's language and did not want the way she spoke to frighten her. The therapist spoke slowly, waiting for Patty to respond, even during long periods of silence, and allowed Patty to set the pace of the dialogue in the session. The therapist also noted that she purposely refrained from asking Patty about her body sensations, something she normally would have done, because she wanted to follow Patty rather than guide the session herself. Many valuable lessons can be derived from this chapter on setting aside techniques. I came away with 5 practical tips for the counselor who wants to use this practice with clients who may be especially fearful. My top 5 takeaways are as follows. Make clients comfortable. Validate clients' feelings. Give clients control. Be honest with clients. And make contact with clients. Each of these will be explored and developed further in the next several slides. In the transcript, the therapist noted that her primary goal was seeing if there was any way to help Patty become more comfortable. This is extremely important because if a client is demonstrating extreme fear the way Patty was, nothing can be accomplished until their fears or anxieties are reduced. The therapist worked to do this in a few ways. First, she told Patty where she normally sits and invited her to sit where she would be the most comfortable sitting. Patty still appeared incredibly nervous, and after a few minutes of talking, the counselor learned that Patty felt very uncomfortable when she looked at her. So the therapist spent the rest of the session looking away from Patty, only observing her out of the corner of her eye, in order to help Patty feel more at ease. The therapist worked to make the session as comfortable for Patty as possible. She even spent part of the session discussing what Patty believed would help to reduce her anxiety while she was there. As a result of that conversation, the therapist invited Patty to get up and look around the room in the hopes that it would help her feel more comfortable there. When clients come into a session presenting with extreme fear and anxiety, as Patty did, those fears must be acknowledged and validated. During the session, Patty expressed to the therapist that she did not know if she could trust her. Instead of trying to convince Patty that she was trustworthy, the therapist simply acknowledged her fears and let her know that they were perfectly valid. Her exact words were, "Of course you don't. You just met me. I hope you don't expect that of yourself." In making this statement, the therapist validated Patty's concern and gave Patty the freedom not to trust her. A crucial element of therapy with a client who is fearful is giving the client as many opportunities to have control in the situation as possible. The therapist did this many times while working with Patty. The first place we see her offer control to Patty is in giving her the choice of where she would like to sit. The therapist described her office as large and as having many seating options. An element of control is also given to Patty when the counselor frees her to keep her feelings of distrust towards her. She does not try to dissuade Patty, but rather validates these feelings. Another way the therapist points out Patty's control is through the way she asked questions. She chose to preface her questions by informing Patty that she did not have to answer them. This gave Patty the control to answer the ones she felt comfortable with and to not answer anything she was not ready to discuss. The therapist gave Patty quite a bit of control over how the session proceeded by asking questions like, "Would that be okay with you?" before proceeding with a topic of conversation. Yet another example is when the therapist invited Patty to explore the room. Something she expressed might make her more comfortable. The session ends with an invitation to return for another appointment if this was something Patty desired. Giving control is the opposite of manipulation. It is an essential element to following the client, rather than the therapist taking the lead. I see this as a crucial ingredient to successfully working with fearful and anxious clients, such as Patty. In working with clients, especially clients with fear and anxiety, the therapist needs to be 100% honest with those clients and never make promises he or she cannot keep. Counselors should never try to deceive or trick clients, but do need to leave room to make mistakes. A counselor may not be able to fulfill a promise perfectly, and the clients need to be made aware of that, or they may feel as though they have been intentionally tricked. The counselor should share their desires and intentions, but let the client know that they may not be able to fulfill this perfectly. During her session with Patty, the therapist became aware that Patty felt extremely uncomfortable when she looked at her. Because of this, she let Patty know that she would look away from her. However, she also made a point to let Patty know that while she intended to keep her eyes averted at all times, it is possible that she could be distracted by something in the room that would cause her to glance in Patty's direction. But if this did happen, it would be entirely accidental and not out of a desire to trick her. Making contact with clients is the ultimate goal of a session once a higher level of comfort has been attained. Making contact with clients is quite simple. It really just means being with them and following the direction they take the session. It has nothing to do with directing the conversation and does not even involve eye contact or any form of physical contact. The therapist was able to make contact with Patty after she was given the opportunity to explore the room, something that raised her level of comfort. An interesting poster caught her eye, sparked a conversation, and held some significant meaning for her. In exploring this meaning, the counselor made contact. While this session with Patty did not represent how a standard initial session would normally be approached, and even went against what many would think of as common wisdom, these things should not be the therapist's top priority. The first priority should be ensuring the client is in a place mentally and emotionally to engage in the counseling process. With Patty, the therapist knew she needed to lay aside techniques in that first session, but this need may arise in future sessions with other clients. That is why therapists need the wisdom to know when to lay aside all techniques and just be with clients. The therapist in this example did not think Patty would last the whole hour, but amazingly she did, and agreed to come back. Therapists need to be willing to do whatever is necessary to make the client feel safe and comfortable. When this is done well, progress can begin to take place.